I'm Brian Miller, magician and motivational speaker. If you're a regular subscriber, thanks so much for sticking with me, and if you're new here, welcome to the channel. This is a first thoughts and gentle review of the video capabilities of the Note 8. This is not a comprehensive review of the phone as a smartphone. So last week I got this phone with only 1 day to spare before I had a major trip to fly from Connecticut to Denver, Colorado, do a stage show, catch a red eye back to Connecticut to perform at a bar mitzvah in the area. It was a crazy 28 or 30 hour journey. And I thought, you know what a perfect time to really test the video capabilities of the phone for vlogging. Because vlogging, especially when you're traveling, is an incredibly intense environment, and the best way to test any technology is to put it through the most stressful conditions, not to test it in the easy stuff. If you're new to this channel, you probably don't know my regular setup. I use a Canon EOS M3 as my primary vlogging camera, Canon G7X Mark II as my Casey Neistat, my sidearm attached to my hip at all times. I used to use the G9X, but I upgraded at some point. And I use a GoPro Hero 5 Black for vlogging in the car and all those wonderful things that GoPros do. But I decided to leave all of that in my bag for a day and only exclusively use this for vlogging. That vlog went up yesterday, and if you haven't seen it, you should click right here and go watch it and then come back here, because you'll be able to see really clearly how the camera fared in all kinds of different conditions that I'm about to talk about here in this video. Okay, so first things first. This phone has 3 cameras. There's 2 main cameras right here, right? It's a dual camera, and then of course it's got the camera here, that is the selfie camera. The dual cameras are a wide angle and a telephoto, which means you can get a 2x optical zoom on this phone, which is huge. That means that you can go from your wide angle to a twice as far telephoto and back when you're taking photos or when you're taking videos. You can't zoom in along the way. You either have wide or telephoto. But the ability to use an optical zoom in and of itself was a huge deal for me when I was using this vlogging, because of course one of the biggest reasons to keep using a pocket camera like a G7X, like a Sony RX100, the biggest reason to keep using those is they have zoom capabilities. Now that you can zoom, optical zoom 2x as far with this, it was terrific. Of course, the dual camera is being touted as being able to achieve that kind of fake bokeh effect for photos. It does do that. I'm not really gonna talk about that in this video because as a video creator, that isn't applicable to me. Now, if you went back and watched that vlog that I did in those 24 hours, you'll notice that there was a huge difference in quality between the rear-facing camera, or the main camera, and the selfie cam, the one facing you. The selfie camera has no optical stabilization, whereas both of the main cameras, both of the rear cameras, have optical stabilization. And that meant that when I was walking around videoing myself like this, looking at the screen, looking at the selfie cam, you could see that it was really shaky and the quality was very, very low compared to when I was turned around and filming myself with the main camera or the rear cam this way. It was a much higher quality. Record. I go like this. The wide angle is pretty good. If I just extend my arm like this, you can see that I'm pretty well framed up. Even if I'm a little over, a little like this, it keeps me in the frame pretty well no matter what I'm doing. So there's no issue with filming yourself using the rear camera, the main camera. You will get much better quality and much better stabilization when you're walking around and vlogging and things like that. So let's talk about frame rates for a second. In the main cameras and the rear cameras, you have a couple of different options. So you can film at your standard 1080p and it doesn't tell you what your frames per second are when you do that. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then you can film at 1080p 60 frames per second, which gives you a bit of slow motion options. And you can film at 4K. And again, it doesn't tell you what your frame rate is when you're doing that. So once I brought all the footage into Final Cut Pro, I was able to take a look at what the frame rates were for those 1080p and 4K where they don't tell you. Well, most of the time it's 30 frames per second, which is what most people were expecting and what I assumed it was. But sometimes it was 24 frames per second. In other words, what I realized the camera was doing is that when you were in lower lit environments, not as much light, it was lowering the frame rate to let a little bit more light into the camera. Now that's super helpful, but my question is, Samsung, then why not just give us a 24 FPS option? YouTube creators who want that more film-like look, which is a lot of us these days, we love to film in 24 frames per second natively to get a smoother, more natural film-like look. Why build the ability to film at 24 FPS but not give us the option to actually choose it? It's lunacy. Please, in the next update to the software, give us the opportunity to choose 24 since I know you can do it. All right, having said that, 4K, same idea. It's supposed to be 30. It will occasionally drop to 24 if it's in a low light situation. And you have a slow motion option, which is over here, slow motion. What this is going to do is film 720p at 240 frames per second, give or take. Sometimes it was 250, sometimes it was 230. The camera seems to decide what it's doing based on the conditions, and it doesn't always adhere to what we think of as standard video frame rate. So my thoughts on the frame rate options. Well, we know just based on the specs alone that there's not nearly as many options as the iPhone 8 Plus or the iPhone X or whatever. I don't do iPhones, so we know there's not as many. We know that they have way more options for frame rates, but I will say this, being able to film 1080 at 60 frames per second is enough for me. That's what I have on my G7X Mark II, that's what I use on my GoPro Hero 5, even though it's capable of a lot higher. Because I do native editing in 24 frames per second, if I shoot at 60, I can slow it down 40% for super buttery smooth slow-mo without it getting crazy. So I'm thrilled to have the 60 frames per second option when I'm filming 1080p, and I did test out the 720p at 240, and the slow-mo looked really good. I upscaled it to 1080, and I didn't lose that much quality when I did the upscale in Final Cut Pro. Little tip for you, if you're gonna do the upscale like that, add a little bit of sharpening in your software to the clip just to bring it back a little bit. So if you want to switch between the rear camera and the selfie cam, Samsung makes it really easy. All you have to do, you can just flick up to get to the selfie cam, flick up again to get back to the auto, or can you flick down? Seems to work easier flicking up like that. So you can just switch, so you can switch back and forth between the selfie cam and the, okay, little finicky, but you get the idea. It works pretty well most of the time, particularly if I am one-handeding. If I'm one-handed like this and I just want to flick my thumb up, I can switch it over to selfie, which is really, really helpful when you're running around with one hand, particularly if you're using the pop socket and holding the phone like this. I will say, if you're holding the phone in one hand without the pop socket option, it's not as easy to flick because your thumb, I have big hands, my thumb barely reaches the screen, you see? But if you're holding it in the middle using a pop socket like this, it's much, much easier to get there. Autofocus performance on the camera, when I'm using the main camera, the rear cam's autofocus was almost perfect. I mean, I don't know if it ever wasn't perfect. The main cameras, whether you're zoomed in optically 2 times or not, the wide angle, the telephoto, it was perfect. The selfie cam, not so much. The selfie cam it did a lot of focus hunting. It was very, very soft. It just didn't look good. Even when I had it sitting on a tripod and stabilized, it did a lot of focus hunting. So storage is a big deal on this phone because unlike the iPhone, this has removable storage. I have a 200 gigabyte micro SD card in here, and I'm having all my video and photos automatically saved to the SD card, which means I can go for a long time videoing on this and not worry about running out of space on the internal memory. That is huge. If you watched that vlog, you would hear that the audio did really, really well. I was incredibly impressed with the audio coming straight out of this phone. I did not attach any extra microphones or that Rode video, I don't know, Video Mic Me or whatever it is. I didn't use any of that. That was the audio right out of the camera.
I'm used to my car with the proximity start. All right, here we go.
I was incredibly impressed. I thought it almost never distorted. In fact, I don't think it ever distorted. And on top of that, when there was a lot of wind, it somehow managed to wind filter, cut out, reduce the wind. You were able to hear me pretty clearly even when the wind in Denver was like 40 or 50 miles an hour or whatever it was. I mean, it was insane.
Well, this will be a good test to see how the microphone fares in the wind. I'm guessing you're not gonna be able to hear me at all right now.
Okay, the color rendition. Well, I use Canon cameras, and Canon is notorious for their phenomenal color rendition. How are the colors on the Note 8? They're okay. I've always found smartphones to produce even the best video. The colors, it's just a little flat. They're a little lifeless. The iPhone looks better right out of the box from what I've seen, but that's just because it's way oversaturated. I like that this has a flatter color profile, but even given the flatter color profile, once I went in and did color correction and grading the way I normally do it, I'm just not thrilled with the way that it produces colors. It's kind of a lifeless image, but to be fair, that's not really a critique of this specific phone. That's a critique of pretty much all smartphones, no matter how good the video capabilities are. I've always found that to be the case, and maybe it's because I'm using Canon cameras, which just have such a beautiful color profile, color rendering. How does it do in low light? You pretty much know the answer to that. The camera sensor in a smartphone is very, very small compared to even the 1-inch sensors on like the G7X or the RX100 series, or the, you know, larger sensors on mirrorless and DSLR cameras. So smaller sensor, not as good in low light. I will say it does a pretty good job of adjusting to low light conditions. For example, here's a clip I took at that bar mitzvah the very next day. You can see it's pretty good. It's not too grainy. It's pretty smooth. It's clearly lowering the shutter speed to let in more light, and lowering it down to 24 frames per second to let in more light. So it's not bad. Okay, those are my initial thoughts on using the Galaxy Note 8 as a primary vlogging camera. Is it going to replace my Canon M3 or my G7X Mark II or my... No, it's not gonna replace any of those. But what it will do is it will give me the confidence to go out in, you know, when I'm just running to the store, going out to eat with friends, and I'm not really planning on vlogging, but most of the time I still strap that G7X Mark II to my hip, just in case I see something that I really want to get it and I want to get a good quality of it. This will replace those moments. I don't need to strap that pocket camera, no matter how good the quality is, to my hip anymore for just those impromptu things. I can now rely on my phone for the impromptu video and photo moments, if nothing else because it's got that optical zoom, which is so useful, and it looks really, really crisp. Those are my thoughts. What are your thoughts? What did you think about the Note 8? Do you have it? Have you been using it? If not, are you thinking about getting it? What questions do you have for me? Leave them in the comments down below. As always, my name is Brian Miller. I hope you enjoyed this. Please hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, if you found it helpful to you. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. I am a magician and a motivational speaker. I travel the world sharing my magic and my message with people. You can follow my vlogs. It's a lot of fun. I do camera tutorials and gear reviews and all kinds of interesting things, but this video has been long enough, so I will leave you by saying that our world is a shared experience.